Chapter 1532. Soon, the topic changed from drinking tea to the main topic. When Mandu Latu heard this, he couldn't help but admire the other party's quick-wittedness. But he still couldn't answer directly, so he smiled and said, "Are we going to the Han people's place? I'm afraid they won't welcome us." "How do you know without trying? Speaking of which, I have some friendship with the Han people, especially the King Wunan of Daemyong. We have already established a connection. Presumably, as a friend, if I make a small request, he will certainly satisfy it." Odin Gerald had a very sincere smile on his face, giving people the feeling that he and Yang Chendong were old friends. In front of a general, talking about the benefits of the enemy's commander-in-chief was already a taboo, but Odin Gerald didn't care at all. Obviously, he had already made up his mind and wasn't going to change it. After hearing these words, Mandu Latu became silent. After probing again and again, Odin Gerald finally pointed out the main topic. At this moment, he had no choice but to express his attitude. It's just that this attitude was really not easy to express. He already knew that the three provincial kings of the Southern Ming Empire and Banj Empire were acting separately. Now, the five-star army's backyard should be on fire. At this moment, it's not the time to make a final decision. If the five-star army couldn't withstand this pressure and withdrew back to their country to quell the chaos, then the danger of the Timur Empire would be eliminated. Then, Great Khan Amur would be victorious. At this time, standing on Odungural's side, wouldn't it be suicidal? Mandu Latu had his own worries and thoughts, so he didn't answer this question immediately. In this regard, Odin Gerald, who saw everything in his eyes, wasn't surprised. On the contrary, he was a little happy. He was most afraid of the other party's rejection. If that's the case, then whatever he wants to say will be useless. It's not impossible for the other party to directly capture him and send him to the Great Khan. Although he had already made this decision on the way here, he still didn't want the worst result to happen, because it means that whether the Great Khan Amur wins or loses in the end, he will be a loser. Therefore, what he wanted was for the other party to remain silent. Only then would he have the opportunity to speak more of his thoughts. "General, I know what you're hesitating about. I also know what you're worried about. However, I don't know if you've thought about it, but the Timur Empire's current state is not due to Amur's contributions alone, nor is it due to his father, Abu Said Mirza's contributions. Instead, it is the result of everyone's efforts. But now he thinks that his position is stable, so he wants to get rid of those who disagree with him. If he wants to monopolize everything, will others allow it? Today, they made an example out of our shaman clan. Once they succeed and get the benefits, they might make an example out of someone else. For example, Great General, if you can defeat the five-star army this time, then your contribution will be so great that I'm afraid it will cause some people to be vigilant. The Han people have a saying, "Great contributions shake the Lord." And there is another saying, "After the birds have flown, the bow is put away." When that time comes, do you think you will still be valued and not be suspected? Speaking up to here, Odungural couldn't help but sneer. "I'm afraid that when that time comes, the fate of our shaman clan will be a lesson to you, Great General." At this moment, Mandu Latu's face finally trembled. To be honest, it wasn't that he didn't consider this problem, but he thought that with the shaman clan in front of him, the Great Khan would definitely not make a move on him. But what Odungural said was right. Once the shaman clan was dealt with, what would happen? He would become the one who stood out. And with Amur's suspicious nature, even if he lost his military power, it would be difficult for him to have a good ending. This was the saying, "Accompanying a ruler is like accompanying a tiger." This was the sorrow of a capable minister. If a capable minister met a good master, then perhaps it would be better. But once they met a master with a strong jealousy, the end result was predictable. History also proved that a capable minister didn't have a good ending. Mandu Latu's face changed. This was a good change. In Odungural's eyes, he was confident. But he still felt that it wasn't enough, so he continued, "At least the Great General is worried about whether the five-star army will withdraw or not. This is actually not a problem. A Han army that even destroyed the Golden Horde, how could it easily submit to a small Bangra and the Southern Ming king? Even if he has no choice but to retreat for the time being, look at our surroundings. The previous Khanates no longer exist. Only the Khanate of Crimea is left. Once the five-star army takes care of their own backyard, how are we going to face them? Yes, the Khanate. At that time, Will there still be people who will find trouble with the 5-star army and attract their attention? Great General, don't you think, how unreliable is it to entrust the hope of survival to others? This shouldn't be your style, right? Even Odungurl said this. At this moment, Mandu Latu didn't know what to say. At this moment, he had to admit that Odungurl was indeed a good diplomat. In the face of such a person, he had already lost a round in terms of language. Okay, but I don't know what kind of agreement you have with the King Wunan of Daemyong. What can I do? What can I get in return? Finally, Mandu Latu lowered his head. Not for anything else, even if he wasn't afraid of death, he still had to consider the safety of his family and dozens of people. He could die on the battlefield, but that was under the premise that the Great Khan guaranteed the safety of his family. If he died, and his family also died, then he would be the greatest sinner, and he would die with everlasting regret. Ha ha ha. Odungurl finally laughed. He knew that the matter was settled. His nemesis, Amor, would not live for long. He was about to win, although this victory was at the cost of his country. But for him, if he didn't borrow the power of the 5-star army, the one who would die in the end would be him. If he didn't even have his life, what country would he talk about? What nation would he talk about? It was a day later that Yang Chendong got the news. When he saw the messenger sent by Odungurl, saying that Mandu Latu would also surrender, but please give him the same treatment as the shaman family, he agreed without hesitation. Even Yang Chendong had to admit that this Mandu Latu was a difficult opponent. The guerrilla warfare he used, combined with the terrain, really gave him a headache. But if he could just spare this person's life in exchange for victory, of course, he wouldn't object. If the other party was willing, he would even put him in an important position. But this was just an idea. Mandu Latu was different from Odungurl. The latter really hated Amor, so much so that he hated the entire Timur Empire. Mandu Latu was different. He had no choice but to surrender for the safety of his family and the general situation. Such a person still had a national complex. So even if you used him, what could he do if he didn't put in any effort? Let's not think about this first. At least Mandu Latu was on his side. Yang Chendong was now ready for everything, except for the east wind. This east wind was the time when the ice and snow would melt. March, 1465 AD. The heavy snow that hadn't been seen in 100 years finally began to melt. The 5-star army that surrounded the Timur Empire also began to move. They began to march forward in several different directions. Amor, who received the news, was shocked, but he didn't panic. He immediately sent someone to inform Mandu Latu and let him move the arranged ambushes to disrupt the 5-star army's line of sight, cut off the enemy's logistical supplies, and delay the enemy's advance. As long as the time passed, the 5-star army would have the possibility of retreating. Although the city was very lively this winter, due to the current tense situation, many people jumped out to surrender. But Amur had never doubted his great general, Mandu Latu. He understood the other party. This was a smart person. In addition, he knew that the shaman family was his current enemy. As long as the situation wasn't so bad that it couldn't be saved, he could use this person without worry. If one were to say that Amur was indeed suspicious, then which monarch wouldn't be? Even Yang Chendong was suspicious of people and had to use them. But it also depended on the person. For example, Mandu Latu, he did not have too many doubts. Although he knew that many people had gone to him during this period, the informants he sent told him that the Supreme General had not made any move to deploy troops. This made him completely relieved. What he didn't know was that he didn't need Mandu Latu's order to move the troops. He only needed to tell Odungurl where the troops were hidden and let him pass on the information to the 5-star army. Just like when Great Khan Amur gave the order to Mandaratu to start guerrilla warfare, the 5-star army was also encircling and annihilating the Timur Empire's army that was hiding in various places and didn't know that their positions had been exposed. With the 1st Cavalry Division of the World's Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division, as long as they had a clear target, they could appear as fast as they could without the obstruction of the heavy snow. Then they would charge, and there was no more after that. Unless they had firearms, no one would be a match for these two powerful cavalry units. Over the years, the soldiers of the two armies had become accustomed to living on horses. They could easily sleep, eat, and kill enemies on horseback. After countless battles, they had rich combat experience. They knew what kind of battle formation to face the enemy, and how to find the enemy's weak point in the shortest time to attack. It was as if these things had fused with their lives. This was all thanks to the large and small battles they had experienced. As the saying goes, a long illness makes a doctor. Now, the strength of the two armies was so strong that they were invincible. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that even if Genghis Khan was alive, his most elite cavalry might not be a match for these two armies. Chapter 1533. With such powerful fighting strength, the outcome of the battle was easy to imagine. Even if they took into account the time they spent on the long journey, it only took a month for the Timur Empire's army of 100,000 to be completely wiped out. Those who didn't die were captured. Due to the lack of information, Amur didn't know about this matter. Even Mandaratl, who had betrayed the army, didn't know that the battle would end so quickly. As the good news came in one after another, the five-star army's main force finally didn't have to worry about anything and could attack Herat without any worries. After a month and a half, the first five-star army suddenly arrived at the capital. When Khan Amur heard the news, his expression changed greatly and he shouted that it was impossible. He didn't believe that the five-star army would take the risk to appear outside the capital before the problem with the supply route was solved. Didn't they know that if they couldn't successfully take down the capital, they would become an isolated army? Wasn't that very dangerous? With all kinds of disbelief, Amur climbed up the city gate tower and saw an unbelievable scene. He saw more and more five-star banners appearing in all directions. Not only that, he also saw many carriages and mules carrying supplies rushing to the enemy camp outside the city. From afar, he could see that there weren't many enemy soldiers escorting the supplies. In other words, they didn't suffer any attacks or harassment during the process. What's going on? What's going on? After a series of shouts, Amur ordered someone to summon Mandaratl. He wanted to ask his great general. Regretfully, he sent people out, but when they reached the great general's residence, it was already empty. Mandaratl had actually disappeared into thin air. After hearing the news, Amur's face was incomparably pale. At this time, even if he reacted slowly, he knew that this great general must have betrayed him and exposed the location of the troops outside to the five-star army. This allowed the enemy to appear so smoothly in front of him without any worries. The reason why the Timur Empire was able to hold on for so long wasn't because of how powerful their cavalry was or how powerful they were. To put it bluntly, they were using the terrain to cut off the five-star army's supply route. Although Rezin City had prepared a lot of military rations like instant noodles, compressed biscuits, ham sausages, and canned meat. However, there was still a limit to their numbers. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were expending a huge amount every day. Therefore, the food that was convenient and could fill their stomachs was basically given to the main forces of the five-star army. The surrendered Russian and Mongolian divisions did not receive such treatment. In the end, they still had to rely on normal rations to maintain their daily needs. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't have to spend so much effort to attack the Timur Empire. And now, after the only drawback was taken care of by the five-star army, they could finally appear in front of Khan Amur without any worries. Having figured everything out, Amur's face turned red with anger. Search! Even if we have to turn the entire city upside down, we have to find Mandula too for this Khan. We have to tear him into pieces. Tear him into pieces. Yes. Seeing that the Khan was enraged, his subordinates didn't dare to dissuade him and quickly agreed. Then, the 50,000 cavalrymen in the city began to move. They searched every possible corner of the great general's whereabouts, but unfortunately, they still couldn't find any traces of him. When the situation was reported to Khan Amur, someone suggested, "Great Khan, there are still some nobles' houses that haven't been searched yet. For example, Odin Gerel and the others." Enough. The enemy is before us. Let's deal with the current situation first. Khan Amur raised his right hand and waved it gently. Now was the time to unite against the enemy. There was no need to make the city restless. Although he didn't like Odin Gerel and the others, they weren't weak. The people who were related to them could be said to be deeply rooted. If they were to search his house at this time, it would only cause panic. Khan Amur believed that he still cared about the overall situation. However, what he didn't know was that Mandu Ratu was currently hiding in Odin Gerel's house and drinking with him. What he didn't know was that Odin Gerel's hatred for him had reached the point where he would rather see the entire Timur Empire be destroyed than to teach Amur a lesson. It could be said that this kind of hatred had been engraved into his bones. It was greater than the sky. Odin Gerald's mansion was already filled with many mansion soldiers. They were the armed forces of the shaman family. Usually, they were hidden and not known by others. However, now that they had reached a critical juncture, they were gathered in the mansion. Their purpose was to prevent Amor from acting recklessly and attacking them before he died. This way they would have a certain degree of resistance. Actually, it wasn't only Odin Gerald's mansion. The houses of the nobles in the vicinity were also like this. They either activated their hidden forces or spent a large amount of money to hire many guards. In short, they all possessed a certain degree of defensive power. In order to save their lives, they also agreed that once Amor lost his mind and wanted to attack them, they would send reinforcements from all sides. Only in this way could they ensure their own safety. Come, great general, please drink. Although the city outside was surrounded, there was no panic on Odin Gerald's face at this moment. On the contrary, he was still as calm as water. Sigh, I'm no longer a great general. There's no need to call me that in the future. I'm just an ordinary person. Mandu Ratu had a cautious look on his face. Obviously, the whole city was searching for him now. It was impossible to say that he wasn't flustered at all. Hee good. Odin Gerald didn't intend to force him. He poured wine for both sides with a smile on his face, then asked, Brother Ratu, do you think he will act recklessly? It shouldn't be. The 5-star army is outside the city. He can't even deal with them. How can he come to find trouble with us? Knowing what the other party wanted to hear, Mandu Ratu said according to his thoughts. That's true. Hearing this, Odin Gerald nodded in agreement. He reached out his hand to take the wine glass, but before he put the wine to his lips, he asked again, Brother Ratu, he won't go crazy, right? You should know that a crazy person can do anything. No, our great Khan is very wise. He won't go crazy easily. Mandu Ratu said again with certainty. Finally, Odin Gerald didn't stop asking. Instead, he lightly nodded and said with a smile, Good. Come, let's continue drinking. Mandu Ratu's guess was right. Perhaps he understood their great Khan well enough. Amor was indeed not a crazy person. Until now, he was still very rational. Even when he saw the cannons of the 5-star army appearing outside the city from the top of the city tower, he didn't have the intention to kill people in the city. Instead, he called the captain of the guards and gave him an order. He knew that he couldn't defeat the 5-star army. Now that he was surrounded, the only way was to escape. The reason why he didn't make a move on the nobles in the city was because he couldn't spare any energy. Compared to killing others, his own life was more important. The 50,000 cavalrymen in the city were all recruited by him. Among them, the high-ranking officers were all appointed by him. They only listened to him. This was also the reason why Mandu Ratu hid even though he was a great general. He couldn't command these 50,000 cavalrymen at all. This was Amor's final trump card. Now, he had to use this trump card to escape. He firmly believed in a phrase that the Han people often said. Where there's life, there's hope. Although he didn't know if he could escape this time, and if there was a possibility of Dong Shan rising again after escaping, he had to try. Otherwise, if he stayed in the city, even if the King Wunan of Daemyong didn't kill him, he was no different from being dead. The 5-star army was still surrounding Herat. Because there were many mountains and lakes and the terrain was complicated, many routes that seemed to be close had to be taken around. This greatly slowed down the assembly of the army. According to the reported itinerary of the various troops, it would take another 5 to 7 days to complete the encirclement. Before the encirclement was complete, Yang Qindong didn't prepare to launch an attack. He wanted to finish it in one strike. Seeing that Herat was going to be his, he wanted to reduce the losses as much as possible. This was also beneficial for the post-war reconstruction. Therefore, whether it was the Air Force or the cannons, they weren't arranged to be deployed immediately. The 5-star army didn't have any plans to make a move, but an accident happened. That night, the 4 gates of Herat city opened wide. Following that, an endless stream of cavalrymen began to charge out. At first, Yang Qindong thought that the enemy was testing the waters. However, as more and more cavalrymen charged out of the city, he and the other generals finally realized that this wasn't a test. They were clearly trying to break out of the encirclement. Break out of the encirclement? It seems that this amour still cherishes his life. Yang Chendong, who had heard the news, looked at the sand table in front of him in the main tent. Young master, we don't have enough troops and aren't prepared enough. I'm afraid we can't kill all of the enemy cavalry. Beta Persei had already put on a suit of armor and appeared in front of Yang Chendong. Although he said that they couldn't, his restless appearance proved that he wanted to attack and beat the enemy while they were down. Yes, our encirclement hasn't been fully launched yet. I have to say that this amour chose the right time. Haha, forget it. The entire Timur Empire is gone. Even if this great Khan escapes, what can he do? Yang Chendong quickly adjusted his attitude. In history, he had never heard of this amour's name, completely unlike Ivan who had a resounding reputation. Even so, this person's strength must be ordinary. If that was the case, then so be it. If he wanted to escape, then so be it. As long as he dares to continue to be the enemy of the 5-star army, then one day, he will be discovered and beheaded on horseback. Thank you to 3-inch Flame for your monthly votes for munitions. Longzi thanks you. Munitions will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 to 4 chapters a day. Please read it without worry. The new book Duke Ferocious will be officially published on the novel website today. Everyone is welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click the new book. Your support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. Chapter 1534. After making the decision to give up, the requirements were lowered. Naturally, there was no burden in fighting. Looking at the eager Beta Persei, he said, "Go, kill as many enemies as you can. It doesn't matter if you can capture a Mu'er or not. Do your best to severely injure the enemy's strength, understand?" Understood. Beta Persei's eyes were immediately filled with fighting spirit. He smiled and agreed, then turned around and left. Not only Beta Persei, but the 5-star army that had arrived outside the city earlier also sent out troops. They chased after the enemy with the goal of severely injuring the enemy's strength. Facing the 5-star army coming from all directions, Timur's cavalry didn't have the slightest intention of fighting. Like a lizard that had its tail cut off, those that were surrounded surrendered one after another, while those that weren't surrounded fled for their lives. Amor's luck wasn't bad. Under the protection of the palace guards, he, who was wearing an ordinary military uniform, fled with the army. 50,000 cavalry. This was the last force. After paying the price of 20,000 people, Amur fled. It wasn't until 2 years later that he was captured by Bai Shuang, the commander of the Yi army. With Amur's escape, 50,000 cavalry came out of the city. In the entire Herat city, it became an undefended city. At daybreak, the 5-star army smoothly entered the city, and they were welcomed by Odunj Ryle and the other nobles. As for Mandu Latu, he had no intention of joining the 5-star army. He became an ordinary person and was eventually sent to other provinces to live out his remaining years in a foreign land. With the fall of Herat city, it also heralded the fall of the once glorious and powerful Timur Empire. After staying in the city for only 5 days, Yang Chendong waited for the other armies to gather in the city. After some inquiries and investigations, Yang Chendong summoned his favorite student, Bai Shuang, and handed over this vast territory to him. Logically speaking, Bai Shuang's time in the army was rather short. At the very least, compared to the new army's commander Su He and the world's first cavalry army's commander Tian Hu, he was slightly inferior. However, these people did not want to stay in one place. Instead, they wanted to follow Yang Chendong and display their skills on the battlefield. In the end, White Shuang took on this heavy responsibility. Yang Chendong was very optimistic about this disciple of his. Not only was he talented in both civil and martial arts, but he was also very young and very loyal. With such a person entrusted with such an important task, he was at ease. In the end, the Yi Army Corps in Central Asia were established. The position of provincial governor and army commander naturally belonged to Bai Shuang. Under his command were the First Army of the Different Race, 50,000 men, the Second Army of the Different Race, 50,000 men, the Second Army of the Different Race, 50,000 men, the First Army of the Meng, 40,000 men, the Fourth Army of the Meng, 40,000 men, the Fifth Army of the Meng, 40,000 men, the Fourth Army of the Meng, 40,000 men, the Fifth Army of the Meng, 40,000 men. He was in charge of the security and construction of this Khanate region. From a regiment commander who led 2,000 people to the current Army Corps commander, who led 200,000 people, Bai Shuang could be said to have walked to the peak of his life. In the face of Yang Chendong's trust, he could only pat his chest and promise that he would reintegrate this area as soon as possible. While moving the population out, he would also move the population in from other areas to achieve the goal of completely erasing the original history. Bai Shuang's thoughts satisfied Yang Chendong. This was exactly what he wanted. He also said that if he needed anything, he could send a telegram at any time. Regardless of whether it was Crimson City or the army, they would do their best to help. Having arranged all this in the 5th month of 1465, Yang Chendong took his main army, including the 1st World Cavalry Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 4th Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the Mabe Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the Mabe Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the 3rd Cold Front Division, the Mabe Division, the 1st Cold Front Division, the 2nd Cold Front Division, and the 3rd Cold Front Division. Seeing Yang Chendong leave with his army, Bai Shuang returned to the army headquarters and summoned the high-ranking officers of the division level and above to discuss how to completely resolve the situation in Central Asia. The first was to send troops to the Crimean Khanate, the only Khanate in the region that still had some influence and had not been affected by the war. Bai Shuang wanted to make this part of Xianxia's territory. Yang Chendong had already put these matters to the back of his mind. Since he had given everything to Bai Shuang, he had to fully trust him. Right now, what he needed to do was take care of those people who dared to take advantage of the chaos to ambush him. And before that, he still needed to take care of one more matter. Yusang. Yusang, in modern-day Tibet, had been established by the Yuan dynasty. In the Ming dynasty, it was known as the Yusang Guard, but in reality, it had never truly been ruled by the Great Ming. During the reign of Zhu Yuanzhang, the Ming dynasty had established a certain relationship with Tibet, but this relationship was completely different from what many people had imagined. At the time, Tibet had already been divided into many monasteries and factions, with no single faction holding the dominant position. Although the historical records of the Ming dynasty claimed that Emperor Hongwu had established the Yusang Prefect, Duogon Prefect, and other military and political organizations in Tibet, in reality, this relationship could not even be considered a bond. It was more like a unilateral declaration of the Ming dynasty. This was because the Tibetan leaders who acknowledged this relationship did not have the authority to govern Tibet, and they could not even be considered a mainstream faction. Thus, on the issue of territory, one could not just rule as they wished. At the very least, one had to consider the feelings and attitudes of others. If those who truly had the right to speak did not know or acknowledge the rule of others, what meaning was there in marking out a few administrative regions on the map? It was precisely this sort of place that, after the appearance of the little butterfly Yang Chendong, had completely broken off relations with the Great Ming. Not only that, it had even joined in with the other Khaganate factions to deal with Yang Chendong. Now that the matter with the Khaganates had been resolved, it was naturally time to look for trouble. As long as others did not offend him, he would punish them. How could Yang Chendong allow others to strike him and not retaliate? The new 5 armies had already received the order to deal with Yusang and liberate it, and they had already set off for that place. Now, all that was needed was for the main force of the army to gather them. Once Yusang was pacified, Yang Chendong would move against the Sudan and Bangla. He would not let go of any of these petty people who had set their sights on him. The new 5 armies. In the headquarters, Army Commander Shi Wanshan was currently listening to the report of his subordinate, Commander Ancient River, from the 1st Cavalry Division. Ancient River gloomily said, "Military Commander, our division has advanced 200-some li, but we still haven't seen the main force of Yusang. Along the way, we've asked the locals, and according to what they said, their main force retreated half a month ago. As for where they went, no one knows." He had originally believed that by seizing the position of vanguard, he would be able to make a name for himself, but contrary to his expectations, he hadn't even seen a shadow of the enemy. This truly left him depressed. No one knows. A hint of concern appeared in Shi Wanshan's eyes when he heard this report, but he quickly turned to Infantry Division Commander Ning Wenfeng and asked, "What does Commander Ning think?" After defecting to the five-star army, this Iron Triangle had finally reunited. Although there was a difference in their military positions, Shi Huanshan was still willing to listen to the opinions of these two brothers under his long-term habit. As the most intelligent of the three, Ning Wenfeng was the one who considered matters more thoroughly. When he heard Gu Heji's words earlier, he had already thought of some things. Now that he was being asked, he voiced out the doubts in his heart. Military commander, according to what Teacher Gu said, I think that these people didn't escape but hid. They're like a venomous snake hiding in a dark corner, ready to open its venomous fangs and bite us at any time. Give me the details. Ning Wenfeng's analysis coincided with his own, so Shi Huanshan asked with an encouraging look. Yes. After agreeing, Ning Wenfeng continued, the information sent by the intelligence department says that Yusang was divided into 3 parts. Front Tibet included modern-day Lhasa and the Shannon region, Rear Tibet included modern-day Kaze, and Ngari included the entire northern Tibetan plateau, modern-day Ngari and part of the Naka region. These 3 parts are like the current Baiming of the south, none of them willing to submit to the other. But ever since that Yang Silu appeared, he actually borrowed soldiers from the Sudan to deal with the other 2 parts. Now that he's divided into 3 parts, he's unified, and he even dares to set his sights on our Xianxia. And this sort of person is brimming with ambition. Even before the battle has begun, he's already retreating. This doesn't fit his personality. Not bad. Shi Huanshan nodded in praise. Continue. Military commander, this subordinate believes that they've only disappeared because they're waiting for an opportunity. Once the opportunity is ripe, they'll definitely jump out and take a bite. Thus, if we want to fight a decisive battle with them, we must first throw out bait. Ning Wenfeng immediately threw out his own point of view, and a plan to lure the enemy out came out from his mouth. From Saker to the town of Rito, Shi Huanshan had followed Ning Wenfeng's instructions and thrown out bait several times, but he still hadn't seen any sign of the enemy. In the end, after traveling 800 li, the army was forced to stop in the vicinity of Sitazang. Altitude sickness had begun to appear in the army, and 30% of the soldiers had already lost the ability to fight due to the lack of oxygen. The rest of the soldiers also showed signs of loss of appetite. This was the frightening aspect of the Yusang region. Very few people who weren't natives of the region could endure this climate without experiencing any changes to their bodies. Looking at the soldiers in the army who were either vomiting incessantly, pale and unsightly, or listless and weak, Shi Huanshan, as the commander of the army, became anxious. When they were still 30 li from Sitazang, the new 5 armies stopped. Order the army to stop. The various divisions began to gather around the headquarters. And as they were doing this, Auxiliary Bishop Wang Dalian was leading 20,000 Tibetan soldiers to surround them. Great understanding of military supplies will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 or 4 chapters a day, so please feel at ease and read it. The new book, The Duke's Ferocity, will be published today on the novel website, and everyone is welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click this new book. Your every support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. Chapter 1535. What a pity! Seeing the 5 astral corps suddenly stop advancing, Dalian, who was hiding in the shadows, shook his head regretfully. Send someone to keep a close eye on them. As long as they dare to advance, find an opportunity to eat them up. As the assistant king and the lord of this land, although Dalian only had 10,000 soldiers, and 5,000 of them were newly assembled, he was still filled with confidence after seeing the performance of the 5-star army. Altitude sickness could instantly turn a strong man into a weak child. He was just waiting for the 5-star army to weaken so that he could strike with all his might. Unfortunately, the other party seemed to have noticed something and stopped advancing. While he felt that it was a pity, he ordered his subordinate, Shaili, to keep a close eye on the other party and wait for an opportunity to appear. Speaking of which, Yusang's army was mainly made up of monks, and the outside world called them monk soldiers. Those who led the army were not called generals, but monks. Shaili was the monk that Assistant King Dalian valued the most, and he was in charge of the monk soldiers. Seeing the 5-star army suddenly stop advancing, Shaili was puzzled. Unlike the Assistant King's calm personality, Shaili wanted to take the initiative to attack and destroy the Han army. At the very least, He wanted to deal a heavy blow to the enemy and let the Han know the strength of the monk soldiers. Even though the new 5th Division had 40,000 soldiers, and he only had half of that number, Shaili was still fearless. In his view, a Han army that could not adapt to the climate was just a paper tiger, not something to be afraid of. After hesitating for a long time, Shaili made the decision to take the initiative. Make preparations. Tonight, we will try to launch an attack. Let's probe the situation of the 5-star army. At this moment, in the headquarters of the new 5th Division, Commander Shi Wanshan did not know that he had already become the prey in the eyes of some people. The reason he ordered the army to stop was not because he had noticed anything, but because of the altitude sickness. When he saw that the fighting strength of the army was constantly being depleted, he began to panic. In this state, how could they set a trap for the enemy? It was already difficult for them to even protect themselves. It was precisely because he sympathized with the soldiers below that they were able to escape a calamity. Otherwise, once they had entered the enemy's ambush, it would really be difficult to return. Within the military headquarters, Cavalry Division Commander Ning Wenfeng had a look of self-reflection on his face. Commander, this is all my fault. I originally thought that by letting the 1st Cavalry Division take the lead and penetrate deep into the enemy's territory alone, the enemy would definitely find an opportunity to discover us. Then, we would be able to launch a counterattack and inflict heavy losses on them. But from the looks of it, these Tibetan soldiers are much calmer than we expected. On the contrary, our army has lost a lot of combat power due to altitude sickness. Seeing Ning Wenfeng lower his head and admit his mistake, Shi Wanshan shook his head and said, Commander Ning, don't blame yourself. This matter has nothing to do with you. The altitude sickness is so strong that it completely exceeds our imagination. This is the reason why the soldiers are unable to adapt to the altitude sickness. As for the matter of luring the enemy, let's talk about it later. Right now, we should first think about how to solve the soldiers' physical condition and let them recover their combat power. The altitude sickness being so strong was also beyond Shi Wanshan's expectations. It was also because of his unusual experience since childhood. As a bandit, after joining the army, he had traveled to all sorts of places. These experiences allowed him to quickly adapt to various climates and didn't cause too much of a reaction. Didn't you see that even the 1st Cavalry Division's commander Gu He, who usually looked like a strong and sturdy man, was currently vomiting and having diarrhea in his tent, losing half his life? If even the general was like this, one could imagine how the ordinary soldiers below would react. Under the current situation, it would be better if they didn't encounter the enemy. Once they did, who knew what would happen? At the thought of the possible problems they might encounter, Shi Wanshan's expression became very unsightly. Commander Ning, now is not the time to think about luring the enemy. Instead, we should think about how to protect ourselves first. How about this, you go to the army and count how many soldiers are still able to fight. Then, you can organize them into groups and command them. You'll be responsible for guarding the tent first. I'll also immediately report the situation here to the 6th young master, and ask him to send reinforcements as soon as possible. It had to be said that as a senior officer in the army, Shi Wanshan was very qualified. At least he knew how to judge the situation and not blindly act recklessly. If it was a fierce general who only knew how to fight and kill, he probably wouldn't even consider these things. After receiving the military order, Ning Wenfeng went to make preparations. Looking at his departing figure, Shi Wanshan couldn't help but rejoice that he still had a commander under him who didn't have altitude sickness. Otherwise, he would really fall into a situation where he didn't have a general to rely on. Altitude sickness was a pathological reaction that occurred after the human body entered a high altitude and was exposed to a low pressure and low oxygen environment. For example, when an outsider first came into contact with this kind of climate, they would feel all sorts of discomfort. Unless they lived here for a long time and got used to it, their condition would become much better. Of course, this didn't exclude people like Shi Wanshan and Ning Wenfeng, who naturally didn't have such a strong reaction. While Ning Wenfeng went to the army to investigate, Shi Wanshan didn't remain idle. He used the radio station to report the situation to Yang Chendong. At this time, our Bugnam of Gojoseon has already led his army to the edge of Ili and is preparing to enter the Yusang region. After reading this telegram, Yang Chendong's expression turned extremely grave. As someone who came later, he naturally understood what altitude sickness was. A large part of the reason why Tibet was so sparsely populated was because of this altitude sickness. In his eyes, the Tibetan soldiers and monk soldiers of the Yusang region weren't frightening. What was frightening was that the natural climate made it impossible for an army to display its normal fighting ability. This made the enemy's strength even more apparent. The best way to deal with altitude sickness was to rest more and exercise less. When necessary, one could rely on oxygen to alleviate the discomfort. But right now, he didn't have any oxygen. Even though he knew how to alleviate the discomfort, he was still somewhat at a loss. After pacing back and forth for a long time, Yang Chendong raised his head once more, his eyes brimming with resolve and determination. Send a message to Commander Shi Wanshan. Have him rest where he is. Until the soldiers of the army recover, they are not allowed to advance. Tell him that this king will send someone to escort the provisions and guarantee that there won't be any problems with their provisions. Also, order the other armies to speed up their march. Once they enter the Yusang region, they are to immediately find encampments to rest and reorganize. In addition, find some young commoners in the vicinity to form another plateau army. Quickly go and handle this matter. After waving his hand at Chief Wang Shan, who was waiting for a reply, Yang Chendong, who had just issued a string of orders, felt his confidence return to his body. Shi Wanshan had sized up the situation. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, he had decided to stop advancing. This was undoubtedly the correct decision. With this firm attitude, he no longer demanded that the other side continue to advance. He only needed to maintain the current situation and exert some pressure on the Yusang region. At the very least, he would send an army to the Yusang region. He wanted to see how many soldiers were unable to adapt to the climate. If there were, he would immediately arrange for them to withdraw. To put it bluntly, as long as this sort of altitude sickness was properly treated, it wouldn't take anyone's life. It would just be a matter of some people reacting more strongly, some reacting less strongly, or a very small number of people not reacting at all. He only needed to select those soldiers who didn't react and have them continue to advance. This problem would be resolved. For the sake of safety, Yang Chendong had also decided to send an army to the Yusang region. The local people had probably already adapted to this climate. If he could send them out, the effect would naturally be the best. 3 consecutive orders were issued. As the main force of the army advanced, it also began to busy itself with the recruitment of soldiers. As soon as the 5-star army's recruitment strategy with its generous pay was announced, a flood of people came to apply. After all, in the Yusang region, where food and clothing were hard to come by, being able to eat and be paid was something that many people could only dream of. Moreover, when the telegram to the new 5-star army reached Commander Shi Wanshan's hands, he became even more determined to hold the line and wait for reinforcements. He had someone make a copy of the telegram and send it to Division Commander Ning Wenfeng. Then, he respectfully waited for reinforcements to arrive. At this moment, on the outskirts of the new 5-star army camp, Monk Shaili was slowly approaching with 4,000 soldier monks. As a probing attack, although Shaili had made a strong request, Auxiliary Bishop Wang Dalian had still only given him 4,000 soldiers. 2,000 of them were new soldiers that had just been recruited. Although the scouts had reported that the 5-star army had suddenly stopped advancing because too many people were suffering from altitude sickness. However, how could Dalian know that this wasn't a ploy by the enemy to lure them out? If the enemy didn't react, or if they didn't have such a large reaction, wouldn't he be sending all of his troops into the tiger's den? Out of caution, he only gave Shaili 4,000 soldier monks. In his opinion, this was enough to test the true strength of the 5-star army. Division Commander Ning Wenfeng didn't know the situation on the outskirts, nor did he understand the surrounding environment. After receiving the orders from the army commander, he only sent out scouts to be in charge of all reconnaissance activities within 5 li of the camp. After all, before they had enough strength, if they discovered that the enemy was further away, they wouldn't be able to chase after them. As such, it was better to gather all of their troops into a fist. At the same time, Ning Wenfeng also investigated the entire new 5-star army. He found 15,000 soldiers who didn't have such a strong reaction, and temporarily organized them into a division to be responsible for the safety of the entire new 5-star army. When all of this was done, the sky had already turned completely dark. The camp started to make fires and cook. From afar, it looked quite busy. Chapter 1536. Speaking of which, the risk of altitude sickness taking one's life was very low. As long as one could rest in bed for a while after experiencing the sickness, there was a 90% chance that the sickness would be alleviated. And as long as one stayed in this climate for a long time, they would slowly get used to it, and their bodies would recover their various functions until they were as lively as dragons and as lively as tigers. At present, the soldiers and officers who had experienced the sickness were all resting on their beds, waiting for the day when they could get used to it and recover. The only worry was whether the new 5 armies would be able to last until then, or whether the Tibetan soldiers would give them this opportunity to rest and recuperate. This would test Ning Wenfeng's defensive capabilities. Once an enemy appeared, whether he could beat them back at the first moment would affect the enemy's judgment and prevent them from acting recklessly. Although no one knew if these Tibetan soldiers would attack the new 5 armies, Ning Wenfeng had still thought of several ways to deal with the situation, so it was better to be prepared. In the middle of the night, when this division commander was still unable to sleep due to his heavy heart, a policeman suddenly shouted from outside the tent. "Division commander, the scouts have reported that they've discovered quite a few figures on the perimeter of our camp. They can't tell if it's the enemy or how many people have come. Take a look." By the time the word "take a look" was said, Ning Wenfeng had already walked out of the tent, fully dressed. It was true that he had been lying down, but he had not taken off his outer robe, precisely in case something unexpected happened. It now seemed that the enemy had moved even faster than he had imagined. The telegram requesting reinforcements had just been sent during the day, so reinforcements couldn't have arrived so quickly. Thus, the ones who had come now were definitely the enemy. The thought of the enemy caused Ning Wenfeng's expression to turn rather grim. He knew very well that if he couldn't beat back the first wave of enemies, the new 5 armies would be in real danger once they saw through the true strength of the enemy. Order. All the commanders and soldiers of the Provisional Division are to move out with this division commander. Ning Wenfeng had decided that he would either not move or use all his strength. In order to not let the other party see through the true strength of the 5 fresh armies, he gave up on the idea of probing the strength of both sides. The moment he made his move, he would send all of his 15,000 soldiers to give the other party the impression that they were powerful. Only in this way could he achieve the goal of effectively shocking the other party. The new 5 armies quickly became lively. The soldiers of the newly formed temporary division looked for their squad leaders looked for their platoon leaders looked for their company commanders, and so on. Very soon, the first temporary regiment was assembled, followed by the second. All of this was due to the 5-star Army's training program. One of the training programs, the emergency gathering at night, was very useful at this time. All right, the 1st and 2nd regiments will follow me and charge out. The other regimental commanders will follow after the formation. There's no need to wait for orders. Knowing that speed was the most important thing in war, Ning Wenfeng shouted and led 2 regiments, a total of 4,000 soldiers, to charge out of the tent. They didn't even try to defend and chose to attack as well. Although doing this would inevitably cause some losses, in order to not let the other party see through their true strength, Ning Wenfeng had no choice but to do this. The movement in the camp quickly woke up the sleeping commander Shi Wanshan. When he heard from his subordinates that the enemy had come to attack the camp, he was shocked. He didn't think that the enemy would appear so quickly. It seemed that the other party had seen through the fact that the soldiers in the army had altitude sickness. "Commander, Division Commander Ning sent out all the soldiers without altitude sickness at once. Isn't this too risky?" A few division-level officers with ugly expressions and weak bodies walked out of their tents and came in front of Shi Wanshan. However, at the same time, there were people who raised different opinions. They believed that for the safety of the camp, they should at least arrange for some people to stay behind. "No." Shi Wanshan shook his head and said without any doubt, "Commander Ning's method is correct. In order to not let the enemy see through our true strength, the safest method is to go all out in one battle. As for the safety of the camp, with me here, there won't be any problems." After saying this, Shi Wanshan took a 3-meter-long broadsword from a guard and held it in his hand. Then, he stood in front of the camp like a door god. It was as if he was a man who could stop 10,000 enemies. "Men, bring this division master's spear over as well." Seeing this scene, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ancient River, propped up his sickly body and said to the guards beside him. With Shi Wanshan taking the lead, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Ancient River, the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Li Yu, and the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Meng Chao, all picked up their weapons and stood in front of the camp. Although some of them were still extremely weak, they would still pick up their weapons and fight to the death if an enemy came to kill them at this time. This kind of stance of wanting to fight to the death influenced more people. Gradually, more and more officers came out of their tents after hearing the news. Finally, many soldiers also walked out of their tents with their sickly bodies, looking as if they were facing death with equanimity. As for Ning Wenfeng, he led 15,000 warriors and rushed out of the tent one after another, fighting with the monk soldiers who were coming at them. In the darkness, Monk Shali also couldn't see how many soldiers came from the 5-star army, so he didn't retreat immediately. Instead, he ordered the army to meet them head-on. Since this was a test, how could they know the strength of the other party without fighting? But when he made his move, Monk Shali still had an idea. He arranged for people to take a detour to the 5-star army's camp to see what was going on there. He had a feeling that the other party had sent out all the soldiers they could. If this was really the case, the 5-star army's camp would definitely be quiet, and he would have achieved the result of probing the other party's strength. Ning Wenfeng, who led the army to charge, was overjoyed when he saw that the monk soldiers didn't retreat after seeing him and instead charged towards him. What he was most worried about was that the other party would retreat. If that was the case, he didn't dare to guarantee that it was the right decision to send people to chase after them. Most importantly, he was worried that under such intense movement, the soldiers' bodies wouldn't be able to withstand it. Would there be a lack of oxygen? If the other party really retreated, he would be in a dilemma. Now that the enemy wasn't retreating, it gave him a good opportunity to annihilate them. In order to show the strength of the 5-star army, he had to grab this opportunity. Come on, let's outflank them. We can't let the enemy escape. Ning Wenfeng laughed heartily as he ordered the 5-star army behind him to surround the monk soldiers. Relying on their advantage in numbers, they quickly surrounded the monk soldiers. Shali was careful and didn't charge forward with all 4,000 soldiers. Instead, he left behind 1,000 veterans so that if there was a chance, he would kill his way into the 5-star army's camp and wreak havoc. And it was this action that saved his life. When he saw that the number of 5-star soldiers was increasing in the darkness, and they had already outnumbered them by 4 to 5 times, his expression became extremely ugly. Why are there so many 5-star army soldiers unharmed? Are they not afraid of altitude sickness? Or did they send out all the people they can? Or is this a trap to lure me into sending out troops? Shali was filled with doubts. He decided to send out scouts to report back to the 5-star army's camp before making a decision. During this time, he could only watch as the 3,000 soldiers he sent out were surrounded and slaughtered by the 5-star army. The 5-star army's numbers were too many. It was so many that even if Shali brought out 1,000 Tibetan soldiers, monk soldiers, they wouldn't be able to solve the problem. He could only hope that the 5-star army's camp would be empty. After a huge battle, the 5-star army's soldiers could be said to have killed to their heart's content. Out of the 3,000 Tibetan soldiers that were surrounded, 2,000 of them were new soldiers. They had never seen such a battle formation before. Being surrounded by so many people already made their hearts flustered. The enemy's numbers were also several times their own. When they fought, there would be several weapons aimed at them at the same time. It was truly impossible to guard against. The battle ended without any suspense. In just an hour, the 3,000 Tibetan soldiers were completely wiped out. During this time, under the command of Division Commander Ning Wenfeng, they didn't even take a single enemy captive. In a situation where their own strength was somewhat weak, keeping captives would only attract unnecessary trouble. Shali had already retreated halfway through the battle. The scouts he sent out had already sent back news. Outside the camp of the 5-star army, the scouts saw countless soldiers of the 5-star army standing there in a line. It was a huge crowd, and there was no end to it. This discovery frightened the scout, and he hurriedly reported back. When Shali heard the news, he was also shocked. He immediately turned around and left without caring about the soldiers that were being killed. This time, the probing ended in a huge defeat. After Ning Wenfeng won this battle, he ordered the soldiers to chop off the heads of the Tibetan soldiers. He wanted to build a capital to intimidate the enemy. When he finished cleaning up the battlefield and returned to the camp, he saw Division Commander Shi Wanshan leading a group of people to guard the entrance of the camp. The smart Ning Wenfeng quickly understood what had happened. He hurriedly took large strides forward and half knelt in front of Shi Wanshan to beg for forgiveness, Division Commander, it is this subordinate's negligence. I sent out all the soldiers and didn't leave anyone behind to guard the camp. Please punish me. Shi Wanshan reached out and helped Ning Wenfeng up. He said in a powerful voice, Division Commander Ning is innocent but meritorious. Your actions were correct. This was clearly the enemy's probing. If we couldn't beat them in one go, there would be endless trouble in the future. Well done. Military supply Deming will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 or 4 chapters a day. Please feel free to read it. The new book Duke Fierce will be officially released on the novel website today. Everyone is welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click on the new book. Your support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. Chapter 1537. This was because Ning Wenfeng's all-in gamble had indeed had the effect of intimidating the opponent. When Shaili reported the situation to Assistant Dean Darien, he learned that the 3,000 skulls had appeared outside the camp of the new 5 armies. As expected, the Tibetan soldiers became well-behaved, giving the new 5 armies enough time to wait for reinforcements to arrive. This probing had scared De Lian out of his wits, and in the blink of an eye, a month had passed in this standoff. In this month, Yang Qindong had led his army into the Yusang region and had set up camp on the border. Every day, soldiers who were unwell would appear, and when they were discovered, they would be immediately carried out of the Yusang region. In this month, nearly 200,000 soldiers had been carried out in batches, leaving less than 100,000 soldiers in the camp. After all this time, there was still no sign of anyone suffering from altitude sickness. Yang Qindong knew that these people had already adapted to the environment and climate, and that they had the ability to fight against the Tibetan army here. What was worth mentioning was that of the less than 100,000 soldiers left, the main force was the Mongolian and foreign divisions. This was especially true for the First Army of Russia. Of the 50,000 soldiers, less than 1,000 had suffered from altitude sickness and had been carried out because they were unwell. Perhaps this was because the climate of the Ras dukedom was similar to that of Yusang. But regardless, this was a good thing. Yang Qindong immediately summoned the commander of the First Army of Russia, Ahuli, and the commander of the Mongolian Second Army, He, and entrusted them with the mission of reinforcing the new 5 armies and capturing the Yusang region. Along with them were the nearly 10,000 newly recruited soldiers from the Ili region. Their appearance just so happened to fill the gap between the 2 divisions, filling them to the brim. Both Ahuli and He were deeply moved that Yang Qindong had given such an important mission to these surrendered generals. Just this trust alone made them determined to do their best. At the same time, this was a good chance for them to perform and render meritorious service. With Yang Qindong's orders and trust, the Russian 1st Division and the Mongolian 2nd Division set off into the depths of Yusang. Yang Qindong turned around and led his army out of the Yusang region. Their destination was the Timur Empire, where they were prepared to advance on the Delhi Sultanate. After leaving the Yusang region, the soldiers quickly began to recover. By the time they reached Srinagar of the Chagatai Khaganate, the morale of the army had returned to normal. Half a year ago, the Chagatai Khaganate had been destroyed by the 5-star army, and it was now in a period of reconstruction. When Yang Qindong had stationed his troops in the Yusang region, he had sent a telegram to the new army corps in the first city to prepare enough provisions and transport them here. Here, Yu Mian had to be emphasized. Previously, Yu Mian had strongly disapproved of occupying the Far East and using it as a springboard to enter the Golden Horde and the Ras Duchy. Because of this, when the Far Eastern province was attacked, the new army that was supposed to arrive as quickly as possible was slow to arrive and did not arrive. In the end, it was only after Yang Qindong had personally left Suxian City and arrived at the first city that Yu Mian reluctantly agreed to this war. In order to truly convince him, Yang Qindong had even made a 3-year bet with him. The general idea was that the expenditure of the war could not compare to the gains of the war. Yu Mian, who had studied the teachings of Confucius and Mencius from a young age, had always believed that only the Great Ming was a superior country, and that all other places were barbarians and desolate lands, had gladly accepted the bet. In his eyes, besides the Great Ming, all other places were poor lands. Even if they occupied those places and won the war, their gains would be limited. Otherwise, there would be no such thing as a militaristic war. However, the outcome of the war was so unexpected that even Yang Qindong himself did not expect that after destroying the Golden Horde and the Ras Duchy, The gains would be as much as 500 to 600 million silver taels. When he received this news, Yumian knew that he had lost and was sincerely convinced of his loss. Whenever Yang Chendong wanted to expand his territory, he would raise both hands in agreement. This time, after receiving Yang Chendong's order, Yumian, Tiger's Mane, and Yang Si made sufficient preparations. Other than leaving behind the necessary rations in the first city, the rest of the people were transported to Srinagar city to prove their determination to support this war. Not only that, they also sent a report to ask for instructions. If necessary, the new regiment could also send troops to participate. Yang Chendong was naturally happy to see the change in Yumian and the others thinking. He needed provisions. The provisions brought by the army were given to the 1st Division of the Russian Army and the 2nd Division of the Mongolian Army. Now that the army was short of provisions, there was no need for reinforcements. He still had more than 200,000 people, which was enough to deal with the following situation. Just like this, when Yang Chendong brought the main army to Srinagar city, the city was already filled with provisions and was personally guarded by the 2nd Division of the Mongolian Army. The commander of the 2nd Division of the Mongolian Army, Nyo Duo, was also a Tiger general. He was arranged to be in charge of patrolling the area from the beginning to the end. This time, when he heard that the 6th Young Master's army needed provisions for the East expedition, he personally led the 305th and 306th regiments to Srinagar city. He wanted to see if there was an opportunity to follow Yang Chendong to the front line. In Srinagar city, when the main force of the 5-star army arrived, they saw Nyo Duo and his men waiting at the city gate. Not only that, they had also prepared a hot meal and were waiting for the army to arrive to eat. Subordinate greets the 6th Young Master. When they saw Yang Chendong appear in front of the city gate on his white dragon under the protection of the Black Cavalry, Nyo Duo brought his 2 division commanders, Chu Duo and Mo Benyi, to kneel on the ground to greet him. Rise! When he saw Nyo Duo, Yang Chendong's face was full of smiles. Even though he was the commander of the 2nd Division of the Mongolian Army, he was a Han Chinese. Thank you, 6th Young Master. Nyo Duo responded and then raised his head. His face was full of excitement. In the entire 5-star army, Yang Chendong was like a god. It could be said that wherever he appeared, he had never lost a battle. Wherever he pointed his sword, it would not take long before that place became one of Xianxia's new areas of influence. Since ancient times, there had never been a true Han that could achieve such a feat to be able to open up such a vast territory, to the point that when other races heard the name of Han, they could not help but reveal looks of reverence or tremble in fear. But Yang Chendong did it. He made the Han Chinese the most supreme race in the entire Asia region. Looking at the current situation, the status of the Han Chinese would spread to Europe, Africa, and even further. Just based on this, he should be respected by all the Han Chinese. When Yang Chendong saw the burning look in Nyo Duo's eyes, he naturally knew what was going on. However, he was not arrogant. His goal was not achieved yet. He still needed to work hard. It was far from the time to relax and celebrate his victory. Commander Nyo, thank you for your hard work. Yang Chendong said with a smile. 6th Young Master, thank you for your hard work. The food has been prepared and the rations have been sent over. It is enough to feed the 200,000 soldiers for at least a year. Nyo Duo took this opportunity to report the completion of his mission. Good, let's enter the city. Yang Chendong chuckled as he exerted force with his legs. Immediately, the white dragon slowly moved forward and went straight into Srinagar city. Srinagar city was just beside the Indus River. At the same time, it was not far from the border of the Hadri Sufan Empire. It was an underground border city. According to Commander Nyo Duo's report, when the 5-star army's main force on the Eastern Front forced King Borai to surrender, Ear's army was ordered to launch an operation to destroy the Chagatai Khanate. When they reached Srinagar, the Delhi Sultanate almost sent out troops to help. If it weren't for the fact that Ear's army was fast enough and didn't give them a chance, the two sides would have fought. This Delhi Sultanate is quite bold, huh? Yang Chendong's eyes revealed a trace of disdain when he heard that the other party actually took the initiative to start a war with the 5-star army. Compared to the Xianxia who controlled a large amount of territory, the Delhi Sultanate was just a small country. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a small country. With such strength they actually took the initiative to provoke the 5-star army. It was no wonder that Yang Chendong was so angry. That's right. Such a small place actually dares to challenge the authority of our 5-star army. They are really courting death. The hot-tempered Beta Persei snorted coldly. He was a man with a strong sense of nationality. In his eyes, the world should be ruled by the Han people who had the longest history. As for the other small countries, it was wise for them to submit. Otherwise, they would be wiped out one by one. Looking at Beta Persei's look of disdain, Neo Duo smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Beta Persei, things are not that simple. The reason why the Delhi Sultanate is so bold is entirely because they have India behind them. Because our navy captured the ports of Kaji, Guri, and Sri Lanka, causing great pressure on their southern waters. India actually has the strength, but they are too weak in the sea. They can't do anything to our navy, so they want to find trouble with us on land. This time, the Delhi Suhi state and Bangla state sent troops to our Xianxia's Burma province. They are secretly supporting them." From Neo Duo's report, Beta Persei finally knew the whole story. Thinking that the young master once said that India was a strong country on land, with an army of more than 500,000 people, he couldn't help but stretch out his tongue. If that's the case, they can barely be regarded as an opponent. Chapter 1538. When Yang Qindong heard the same words, he had a different understanding. "Wait, Commander Neo, what did you just say? Did you say that India is secretly supporting the Delhi Sultanate and Bangla?" "Ah, yes." Neo Duo didn't understand what Yang Qindong meant and nodded. "Oh, if it's just secretly, then the other side is still afraid of us. Well, let me think, it should be our navy that made them afraid." Yang Qindong had a confident smile on his face. Someone once asked, in the 15th century, was India stronger than the Ming dynasty? In fact, this question itself was problematic. Whether it was population or territory, the Ming dynasty was completely superior to India. But there were still people who asked this question, which showed that India still had some merits in some aspects. At least it was not a weak existence, otherwise, there would not be such a problem. It was just that India had a fatal flaw, which made it difficult for them to expand even though they had a large population. That was because they were too poor. The size of their territory was too small compared to the population of tens of millions, and India had not developed naval forces. Although there were already fishing boats in the sea, they were far inferior in terms of scale, size, and function. Without enough naval forces, they could only rely on land. It was no wonder that they were poor. They were poor and unable to expand, which was also the root of their weakness. This was also the main reason why the 5-star Army's navy could easily take down some coastal towns in the south, and they did not dare to fight back. As Neo Duo said, they could not do anything to the 5-star Army's navy at sea, but with more than 500,000 soldiers, they could compete with the 5-star Army on land. It was just that India was not sure of winning, so they first instigated the Delhi Sultanate to test the strength of the 5-star Army. But did they not know the horror of the 5-star Army's army? Being able to destroy the Golden Horde and the Timur Empire was enough to explain everything. Originally, Yang Qindong wanted to deal with the Delhi Sultanate and Bangla this time to solve the siege of Myanmar. It seemed that he would have to take them down as well. As the largest country in the South Asian subcontinent, once it became one of Xianxia's territories, the situation in Asia would completely change. After thinking that after taking down India, the whole of Asia would be included in Xianxia's territory, Yang Qindong's eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Neo Duo saw all of this and felt that his chance had come. He immediately knelt down and said, "Sixth young master, Neo Duo requests to fight on behalf of your army." "All right, I got it. You'll be in charge of the food supply first." Yang Qindong looked at Neo Duo and nodded, indicating that he understood this matter. Yang Qindong agreed. Regardless of whether or not Yang Qindong's army would participate in the war, they would still be rewarded after winning the war. Satisfied, Neo Duo retreated. After there was no one else in the tent, Beta Persei asked curiously, "Young master, should we send a message to Xianxia and ask them to send 2 more armies?" "Why?" Yang Qindong looked sideways at Beta Persei and said with a confident smile, "We don't need any reinforcements to fight a small India." Yang Qindong did have such confidence, and this confidence came from the navy. Yesterday, he happened to see a telegram. Long Yuntian's division just happened to be resting near the Indian Ocean, so he could send a telegram to ask them to participate. When the time comes, He would like to see how India will defend under the attack from both sides. Moreover, Yang Qindong now had 2 cold vanguard divisions in his hands. This time, among the provisions that Niu Duo transported, there was a lot of ammunition. With this advantage, it wouldn't take much effort to attack a primitive India, other than spending some time. If it weren't for the fact that the goal of destroying India wasn't in the previous battle plan, he wouldn't even need the reinforcements. Yang Qindong's troops rushed to Srinagar with an army of more than 200,000. When the news reached the Delhi Sultanate, it really scared King Bala Lodi. It must be said that Lodi has some ability, otherwise, outsiders wouldn't call the current sultanate the Lodi dynasty. But because of his special geographical location, it is too difficult to really develop and grow. Not to mention other things, neighboring India has been eyeing him covetously, giving people the feeling that if they are not careful, they may be swallowed up. Just like how Lodi can become the king of the Delhi Sultanate, India must first recognize him. For this reason, he has also tried to get rid of the shackles imposed on him, but unfortunately, the territory is too small and the population is too small. It is easier said than done to really develop the Sultanate. Now, not only does India keep an eye on him, the even more powerful 5-star army has been summoned, giving Lodi nothing but a headache. Previously, the great Khan of the Timur Empire, Amur, had sent an envoy. The general idea was that as long as Lodi was willing to help Bangla send troops to Xianxia's Myanmar province, once they beat back the 5-star army, he would help them become even stronger and break away from the threat of India. It was precisely for this reason that Lodi, after careful consideration, decided to work with Bangla to send troops to Myanmar province. But not long after, the Timur Empire was destroyed. When he heard this news, Lodi was somewhat dumbfounded, and he began to regret his previous decision. Then, he received news that the main force of the 5-star army was heading straight for Yusang, allowing him to relax a little. Then, he placed his hopes on Yusang giving the 5-star army a hard time. If that was the case, they probably wouldn't come to deal with him. After all, he had contributed to the unification of Yusang and had lent troops to them. But he had never expected that in just a little more than a month, the main force of the 5-star army would actually arrive at Srinka and appear in front of him. This truly frightened Lodi. He immediately sent someone to India's King Nehru for help and was willing to submit to him. There was nothing he could do. Compared to submitting to India, he could at least keep his title and property, and he could even have a chance to rebel. But putting aside the fact that all his opponents in the 5-star army had been wiped out, all the kings had either died in battle or become prisoners. Just thinking about the consequences gave him a headache. After the messengers were sent out, Lodi spent every day in fear and trepidation, but he did not receive any reply from India. He thought that things might be going in the worst direction, and he was afraid that India would not help him this time. At this moment, Lodi couldn't help but curse Nehru. Earlier, when he had sent troops to Myanmar, he had asked to borrow food to test India's attitude. The result was naturally that he had borrowed the food. This made Lodi understand that attacking Myanmar was also something that India wanted to see, which was why he had dared to act. But now, seeing that Yang Qindong had destroyed the Timur Empire and was extending his tentacles, Nehru was terrified and didn't care about him anymore. This was truly turning his back on him. He had thought of the most vicious words in his heart just to curse Nehru. But it was useless. If India didn't act, they wouldn't send troops. Was he supposed to face the main force of the 5-star army alone? That was an army of more than 200,000 soldiers, and it was said that they had the best firearms in the world. This kind of opponent made Lodi feel powerless even before the battle. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of surrendering, but after thinking about it for a while, he still suppressed the idea. There were some things that one wouldn't be willing to give up before trying them out. He still had a glimmer of hope in his heart. The 5-star army had just fought a bitter battle with the Timur Empire for more than a year. They must be exhausted and their strength greatly reduced. If they were really tired, how could he say that he didn't have a chance? As long as they could fight against the 5-star army, he believed that India would definitely send troops if there was a chance. In that case, wouldn't there be a chance to turn things around? Thinking about it, wouldn't it be an honor to be the first country to resist the attack of the 5-star army? As for whether this idea was good or not, at this time, Lodi was completely confused by the Battle of Myanmar. This was because in this battle, other than the 7 divisions of the Cold Front sending a regiment to participate in the battle, the rest were third-rate local armies with mediocre combat power. It was precisely because of this that Lodi had the idea that the five-star army was mediocre. If they didn't have the world's most advanced firearms, they wouldn't be that powerful. With the intention of competing with the five-star army, Lodi ordered General Singhal to take 60,000 soldiers and camp in Lahore, west of Delhi, to stop the five-star army from entering the hinterland of the Sudan. Then, he sent someone to India to inform them of his military plans. He also sent someone to Bangla to ask for reinforcements. Even if he couldn't send reinforcements, he wanted to see if he could transfer back the 20,000 troops he had sent to Burma. It was just a small sultanate, so having 100,000 soldiers was actually not a small number. Previously, he had sent 20,000 soldiers to Myanmar with the Bangla army, so there were only 80,000 soldiers left in the country. After giving General Singhal 60,000 soldiers, there were only 20,000 soldiers left in the country, which was close to emptying out all of his assets. It had to be said that it was a mistake to place all of his hopes on the five-star army's expedition without being able to display their full strength. No matter how tired a lion was, it was still a lion. It was far from being provoked by a seemingly healthy sheep. Chapter 1539. The capital of India, Mumbai. King Jawaharlal Nehru was in a very bad mood compared to a while ago. First, the navy of the five-star army had captured Kuji and Gurishing, greatly threatening his safety. This made Nehru finally realize how important it was to have a strong navy. Soon after, the land forces of the five-star army had appeared in the west and besieged the various khaganates. The impulsive Nehru had even been prepared to send out his troops when the five-star army fought with the khaganates. In his view, if the navy could not compare to the five-star army, how could he not win on land? But in the end, reason prevailed over impulse. Before the situation became clear, he wanted to continue waiting and watching. And it was this wait and watch that caused a heaven-shaking change in the war situation. In the span of a few months, the Turi king had surrendered and the Kazakh Khaganate Kagan had been captured. At the beginning of spring, the Timur Empire was struck by internal strife. The great Khan of Amur had broken out of the encirclement and fled, and no one knew where he had gone. Only now did Nehru realize the severity of the situation. But it was already too late for him to send out his troops. Fortunately, he soon learned that the main force of the five-star army had not come to his side, but to the Yusang cavalry. This allowed him to breathe a sigh of relief. But with the previous example, Nehru no longer dared to be careless. He began to mobilize his troops, even beginning to mobilize them in advance so that he could prepare for a future battle. And it was at this moment that several Western warships appeared outside the harbor of Mumbai, giving him a fright. But his fright quickly turned to joy. These Western warships had not come to deal with them, but to sell them weapons. It was clear that the constant expansion of the five-star army from east to west had made some Western countries afraid. Thus, they had set their sights on large countries like India, selling them weapons so that they could fight with the five-star army and wear down their strength, increasing their chances of victory. Although he had spent a significant amount of money, in Nehru's view, it was all worth it. Only with enough firearms could he stabilize his position, and with a high enough position, would he still have to worry about not being able to earn money? Now that they had firearms, 500 cannons and 3,000 muskets, Nehru had spent a lot of money to buy them. This gave Nehru more confidence. After giving the firearms to the Imperial guards, all of them wanted to wait until they got used to it before going to cause trouble for the five-star army. Weren't those Khanates recently defeated? Their foundation should be very poor, right? It was just the right time for him to send troops to snatch them. As for whether or not it would cause the five-star army to hate him, those territories were originally ownerless. If you can snatch them, why can't we? Just as Nehru was still dreaming about sending the five-star army to attack from the rear, the enemy had already made their way here. Their target was none other than his neighbor, the Delhi Sultanate. To the Delhi Sultanate, it was like a fat piece of meat beside a tiger's den. In Nehru's eyes, it was something that could be eaten at any time. The reason why he hadn't made a move yet was because he was waiting for an opportunity. Now that the five-star army wanted to swallow this fat piece of meat, how could he agree? The opportunity that Nehru was waiting for was for the Delhi Sultanate to send troops to fight with the five-star army. When their strength was exhausted, he would make a move and obtain the greatest victory with the least cost. However, he was thinking of sending troops to guide the Sultanate and Bangla to jointly attack Myanmar. He didn't mean that the five-star army would attack and take the initiative to deal with the Sultanate, which would threaten his own safety. Nehru wouldn't sit back and watch such a thing happen. He summoned his officials to discuss the matter of supporting the Delhi Sultanate. The officials below also gave suggestions, but most of their opinions were very unified. They didn't need to send troops first, they only needed to send envoys. They needed to properly warn the five-star army, and tell them that India and the Sultanate had been friendly countries for hundreds of years. If the five-star army sent troops, they would definitely not stand by and watch. Obviously, this was because the five-star army's previous action of destroying the Khaganate had frightened everyone. Unless it was necessary, they really didn't want to be enemies with a powerful enemy like the five-star army. Therefore, they thought that sending someone to warn the five-star army was enough. Until now, the Indians still had their own pride. They thought that they were still very strong and the five-star army definitely wouldn't ignore their warning. This country that could carry dozens of people on motorcycles in the future did indeed have a strange side to them. What they didn't know was that this time, the five-star army's target was them. As for their arrogant belief that no one dared to provoke them, it wasn't even worth a fart in front of the five-star army. If not for the fact that the five-star army had already been fighting for many years against the Golden Horde, the Ras Duchy, and the Timur Empire and the other Khaganates, Yang Chendong would have long ago set his sights on them. There was no reason for him to miss this opportunity. His original intention was for the army to rest and reorganize. As someone who came later, Yang Chendong was keenly aware of how frightening the consequences would be if the army became tired of fighting. The omniscient and omniscient Yang Chendong had clearly made an error in judgment on this matter. When he decided to lead the army from the Yusang division to India, both the generals and the soldiers were inexplicably excited. This was an innumerable amount of military merit. For those soldiers who wanted to return home in glory or those who had great ambitions, this was an excellent opportunity. They were used to hardship, and now that they had finally found a way to make a fortune, how could they be so easily at ease? Yes, military merit was a shortcut to promotion in the eyes of many soldiers, and it was also a way to make a fortune. In the eyes of these people, not having a war to fight was the most frightening thing. How could they possibly be tired of fighting? After Yang Chendong realized that he had made an error in judgment, he actually became happy. Since this was the case, he had to follow this fighting spirit and do even more things, such as destroying India. This country where the majority of the population lived on Earth wasn't as prosperous as it used to be. According to the intelligence reports, 80% of the people had yet to solve the problem of food and clothing, creating enough conditions for them to take down India. They were not invading, but liberating the toiling masses. With this thought in mind, Yang Chendong had no misgivings when he set out. From Srinagar to the south, his first target was the Seor city of the Delhi Sultanate. As a border city, the Delhi Sultanate hadn't garrisoned many soldiers here. This was probably because their neighbor, the Chagatai Khaganate, was also extremely weak and would never dare to start a war. Without a large garrison, the city was naturally very small and couldn't stop the 200,000-some soldiers of the five-star army's main force. Seeing this, the commanding general Singhal decided to give up on this border city. Instead, he gathered his army of 60,000 and retreated to Lahore, putting on the appearance that he was going to fight to the death here. Although it was called a fight to the death, it was actually just Singhal defending. Lahore, which was near the city walls, was considered sturdy and tall. Singhal wanted to become a nail here and block the advance of the five-star army, thus keeping them out of the country. As time passed, if the enemy couldn't take down the city, they would have to face an extremely long logistical supply line. Then, they would feel that the gains didn't make up for the losses and would have the possibility of retreating. It was unknown if Singhal was too arrogant or if they had underestimated the five-star army. When the news reached Yang Chendong, who had already taken over Seor city without shedding a single drop of blood, he immediately asked the intelligence personnel who were familiar with the terrain to set up a sand table. When he saw a road to the west of Lahore, his eyes lit up and he asked, "What's going on with this road? Where does it lead to?" Reporting to the sixth young master, "This road belongs to India." When they first opened this road, it was to make it convenient for them to send troops from their country to the Chagatai Khanate and other places. In view of their strength, the Sultanate could only bow its head and admit defeat, the intelligence personnel said excitedly. Being able to report the situation to the sixth young master in person was enough for him to brag to his brothers when he went back. "Oh ha ha ha." Hearing this, Yang Chendong couldn't help but laugh out loud. Previously, He was wondering if he could enter India as quickly as possible and catch the enemy off guard. He didn't think that there really was such a road, and it was even built by India themselves. This was really asking for trouble. When the road was first built, the Indians probably didn't think that this road, which they could go out and fight at any time, would become a shortcut for others to enter their country. Okay, order the world's first cavalry army to be the left vanguard, and the new army to be the right vanguard. The two armies will choose this road to enter India first. Again, don't focus on snatching territory, and try to eliminate as much of the enemy's strength as possible. Yang Chendong, who was overjoyed, pointed at the road and said immediately. There were already people at the side who were in charge of recording and waiting to convey the order at any time. The two rapid response cavalry armies that received the mission only took 4 hours to assemble the army, and they quickly set off with only 7 days' worth of rations. This time, they didn't even arrange for the logistics and forage vehicles. According to the thoughts of the two commanders, as long as they could catch India off guard, wouldn't they be able to eat and drink everywhere when the other party wasn't on guard? Would they still have to worry about food? The two vanguard cavalry armies set off first. After only staying in Seor for 2 days, Yang Chendong left a division of less than 10,000 men behind to guard the city, and continued to lead the main army south. This time, their target was Lahore. Chapter 1540. At this moment, Lahore city was on standby. The scouts at the front had already sent back news that there were close to 100,000 five-star army cavalrymen rapidly approaching them. Thinking that the five-star army was about to launch an attack, General Sinclair ordered the soldiers to close the city gates. At the same time, he ordered the soldiers to climb up the city tower and prepare for a battle. Sinclair was indeed the general of the Delhi Sultanate. He was cautious and never underestimated his opponents. He had prepared 20,000 archers on the city walls in order to deal a blow to the five-star army that dared to attack the city. In order to achieve the goal of being able to gather all of his forces, he did not arrange for a single soldier to be stationed outside the city. He had completely shrunk all of his forces into a fist that was waiting to be punched out. He was only waiting for the right opportunity to display its might. Sinclair, who was fully prepared, stood on the city tower and watched the five-star army cavalrymen slowly approach the city. Are they all cavalrymen? This shouldn't be the case. Cavalrymen don't have any advantage when attacking a city. Sinclair was confused. He could not figure out what the five-star army was trying to do. Of course, if they really used cavalrymen to attack the city, he would laugh at them. A five-star army that did not know how to use troops was not worthy of his attention. Just as Shingle relaxed and waited for the five-star corps' next move, the five-star corps cavalry got closer and closer. Then, when they were 4 miles away from the city, they suddenly changed directions and rushed out from the road beside the city. Then, they dashed around the city walls and dashed past the city walls. Sinclair could not understand what was going on at all. Could it be that they want to besiege the city? But from the looks of it, they don't seem to have any intention of stopping. Could it be? Sinclair's eyes widened when he thought of the terrifying outcome. Could it be that the enemy's target was not him, but India? It seemed that this was the only way. Things had developed in such a way, which greatly exceeded Sinsel's expectations and shocked him. That was India. Not only did it have a large territory, but it also had a population of nearly 10 million people. Such a large country had always been like a huge rock pressing down on the Delhi Sultanate's head, making it difficult for them to breathe. However, in the eyes of the five-star army, they didn't seem to care at all. It had to be said that in terms of boldness, they were far inferior. At this moment, he couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. Previously, they had asked for help from India, saying that the five-star army that could destroy the Khaganate must be very powerful. With their own strength, they would not be able to stop it no matter what. Since they were all neighbors, they must support them. The Hindustani kingdom did not give any official answer, as if they did not receive the letter. It was said that their King Lodi even smashed his favorite Chinese porcelain to pieces because of it. Now that the five-star army had directly chosen India as their opponent, they had no choice but to send troops. Thinking that once India sent troops, it would greatly relieve the pressure on his side, how could Sinsel not be happy? Go, it's best if both sides suffer. Maybe the opportunity for our country to rise will appear. Sinsel thought so to himself. Other than arranging for someone to report this news to the royal capital, Delhi, He did not make any military movements. Previously, in order to protect Lahore city, he had withdrawn all his troops into the city. How could he have the troops to fight outside the city now?
Besides, the cavalry of the five-star army was so fast that it was far from something he could catch up with.
What if this was a trap set by the enemy and they were waiting for him to send troops out? If that happened, wouldn't he fall into a trap? The careless Sinsel would not make such a mistake. What he had to do was to defend. As long as he defended Lahore city, it would be equivalent to blocking the five-star army's journey to the east towards Delhi. Then, his mission would be completed. In order to lead India into the vortex of war, Sinsel did not do anything. He did not even have the intention to send someone to inform or remind India.
This allowed the new army of the world's first cavalry army to go all the way south after passing through Lahore city.
When they reached Multan city, they still did not encounter any resistance. When 100,000 cavalry suddenly appeared outside Multan city, the city gates did not even have time to close.
With regards to the sudden arrival of the five-star army, the Indian soldiers here were indeed not prepared at all.
They did not even have the basic awareness of being on guard.
They watched as the cavalry entered the city, and the 2,000 Indian soldiers in the city were slaughtered. They did not even have time to set up the most basic infantry formation before the cavalry rushed in front of them.
There was no suspense about what happened next. The border city of Multan changed hands so easily. Whether it was Tianhu or Suhi, they both saw an opportunity. This was a country that did not have any defenses. Since that was the case, it was time for them to continue to expand their gains. Immediately, in addition to leaving 1,000 cavalry to guard the city, the two armies split up and headed towards the hinterland of India in two different directions. They wanted to take advantage of the fact that the other party had not reacted and achieve greater results. 3 days later, Yang Chendong brought the main force of the five-star army to the periphery of Lahore city. This time, they did not have the intention to take a detour. If they did not take down Lahore city, it was equivalent to handing over their rear to the enemy. In the future, the supply route might be disturbed or even controlled by the enemy. This was something that Yang Chendong absolutely could not tolerate. 6th Young Master, 2nd Division requests for battle. 6th Young Master, 4th Division requests for battle. The two commanders of the cold front, Xiao Feng and Ling Daqiang, saw that the enemy was right in front of them and were still curled up in the city. They felt that their opportunity to show off had come. How could they let go of this opportunity? Save the cannonballs if you can. It is not easy to transport them from so far away. How about this? Let the Air Force do it. Yang Chendong chuckled. His gaze did not fall on the two commanders. Instead, he turned to look at the commander of the Air Force, Tian Yu. Compared to the cannonballs of the field artillery, the cost of the Air Force's petrol bombs was lower. After receiving the order, the commander of the Tianyu army was also excited. He stood at attention and promised, 6th Young Master, please rest assured. The Air Force will complete the mission. Aha! Yang Chendong nodded. Even the Golden Horde king of the Golden Horde could be destroyed if he wanted. It was just a small city like Lahore. He was full of confidence in the Air Force. After giving Tianyu a look of trust, Yang Chendong's gaze fell on the two commanders of the cold front. You two should also go and prepare. It will not be long before the enemy breaks through. That will be the time for you to show off your power. Remember, capture them alive if you can. We do not have enough manpower right now. Yes. Xiao Feng and Ling Daqiang did not show any disappointment. Capturing captives had always been their strength. As for not being able to get the credit, it could not be helped. After all, the Air Force could fly in the sky. After the five-star army arrived, they began to make preparations. But because it was already late, and considering the problem of the hot air balloon taking off and being surrounded on all sides, they had to rest for the night. On the city tower of Lahore, Shingle looked bitterly at the five-star army's encampment that stretched for more than 10 miles outside the city. They finally came, and as soon as they arrived, they surrounded the city and put on a determined look. Did they not know that Lahore would not be easy to attack under his long-term preparations? Weren't they worried that if they stayed here for too long, once the Indian army reacted, not only would the 100,000 cavalrymen be chased out, but the more than 100,000 five-star soldiers outside the city might also be chased out? Forget it. Since you must attack the city, let's see who has more means. Shingle shook his head and walked down the tower. At this moment,
He did not have much worry in his heart.
In his view, although the five-star army had more people than him, they did not have enough of an advantage. Under his early preparations, it was really impossible for these people to attack the city.
Thinking of the bows, arrows, kerosene, sleepers, boulders, and other things that he had prepared in the city, he was relieved.
That night, Shingle had a good sleep. In his dream, he saw the five-star army failing to attack the city. In the end, the Indian army finally reacted and chased the five-star army away. In the end, the dream was still a dream. At dawn, the guards woke him up. After breakfast, Shingle walked up the tower in his general's armor. He knew very well that the five-star army would definitely launch a siege today, but he did not know if it was mainly to test the waters or if they would really attack fiercely. He had heard that the five-star army used powerful artillery, but he did not know how destructive those things were. Shingle, who did not even know the power of artillery, was indeed a little ignorant. If he had seen the way the five-star army's firearms attacked a city, he would not be so confident now.
Of course, it was precisely because of the help of these firearms that attacking a city was a piece of cake for the cold front warriors.
In front of powerful artillery, what was the difference between the so-called strong walls and paper? The weather was good and very suitable for flying. In the morning, Division Commander Sun Lixing commanded a total of 50 hot air balloons to rise into the sky. He also personally boarded a hot air balloon and commanded the battle from the sky. The territory of Lahore was not very large. There were only 60,000 soldiers and less than 100,000 civilians. It was not worth using too many hot air balloons. These 50 hot air balloons were enough. Military supply de Ming will be finished next month. I guarantee that it will be finished at least 3 to 4 chapters a day. Please read it without worry. The new book, Duke Fierce, will be officially published on the novel website today. You are welcome to read it. At the same time, please bookmark, recommend, and click the new book. Your support is the greatest encouragement to the prodigal son. Chapter 1541. At 9 o'clock in the morning, the hot air balloons began to take off. One after another, the bombers filled with black oil began to move in the direction of Lahore. On the city gate tower, a group of Kiliarchs followed by Sinjar. They were currently patrolling the city gate tower. In Sinjar's eyes, this first battle was especially important.
Whether or not they could suppress the arrogance of the five-star army would determine whether or not they could take the initiative in the next battle and defend the important city of Lahore.
Look, what's that? In the sky, above our heads, what's that? Oh my God, that thing can move, and it's floating over our heads. Is that an immortal? When the hot air balloons appeared in the sky above Lahore, there were all sorts of shouts from the Sudanese who discovered all this. Due to the close distance and the influence of the Han culture, the appearance of these hot air balloons made many people mistakenly believe that an immortal had appeared. At this time, Sinjar also looked up at everything in the sky at this time with a puzzled look in his eyes. The Air Force had only been used against the Golden Horde and the Ross Duchy before. Because the distance between the two sides was too far, this matter had not reached Sinjar's ears. At this moment, he only looked at the sky curiously, not knowing what exactly it was. But instinctively, Sinjar felt that this thing was somewhat dangerous. It didn't matter if he didn't know. Division Commander Sun Lixing would soon let them know the power of this thing. When most of the hot air balloons reached the designated position, the flag bearer beside him put down the red flag in his hand, indicating that they could freely attack. The Air Force soldiers, who had been impatient for a long time, immediately threw wooden barrels from the hot air balloons onto the ground one after another. At this time, looking from the ground at this time, it really looked like the bombers of the future dropping bombs. After the wooden barrels were thrown down from the sky, lit matches were also thrown down from the sky one after another. In the face of all this, the Sudanese in the city still looked at all this with puzzlement. In their eyes, the lethality of the wooden barrels was extremely limited. They were too small in size and had low damage. They were even more threatening than the primitive catapults. Of course, this perception would soon be overturned. When the wooden barrel fell to the ground, a large amount of black liquid flowed out. When the fire starter fell to the ground, both sides quickly fused together to form huge balls of flames. That kind of scorching feeling, that kind of destructive power began to be astonishingly revealed. The black oil that could not be extinguished with water grew bigger and bigger,
incinerating everything it came into contact with.
As more and more houses and even some granaries containing military rations were set ablaze, Sinjar and the Sudanese soldiers in the city began to panic.
For the sake of the mission, they could see the people's houses being destroyed, and they could also see the people being burned to death right in front of them.
Even if it was war, would there always be sacrifices? However, when they saw that even the rations were destroyed, their expressions changed drastically. Without food, it was the same as having no food. How could people defend the city without eating? Put out the fire, quick! More and more soldiers were pouring water onto the black oil with all kinds of containers.
Not only did the water not extinguish the fire, it only made the fire burn even more fiercely.
This kind of scene that completely overturned everyone's perception made Sinjar feel a sense of helplessness in his heart. Originally, he wanted to have a good fight with the 5-star army and see how powerful the enemy's cannons were. But now, there was no need for the 5-star army to do anything. This fire had completely destroyed the city. Not only were their belongings destroyed, but even their fighting spirit was burned away. He could not wait any longer. Otherwise, he would not be defending the city. He would die here with the city. The 60,000 soldiers in his hands were the most powerful force in the Sultanate. Once the country was lost, Sinjar decided to sacrifice the soldiers to protect the general. He did not want to defend the city anymore. He wanted to rush out and retreat to the capital city of Delhi to rebuild the defense line there. After deciding to abandon the city, Sinjar ordered the generals under him, "Retreat, retreat immediately. Take whatever you can and prepare quickly." The generals, whose fighting spirit had long been burned away by the fire, did not object when they heard the military order. Everyone dispersed and began to assemble their own armies, preparing to choose the nearest city and charge out. Considering that the outside of the city was already surrounded by the 5-star army, no one knew which was the safest. Sinjar simply did not arrange a path for everyone to rush out. He wanted to see if the 5-star army could stop them. How many people could they stop? It's about time. Everyone, get ready. The soldiers of the 5-star army who were guarding the 4 cities saw the raging fire in Lahore and began to prepare to prevent the enemy from rushing out. Yang Chendong's arrangement was very simple. Under the premise that they did not know which city gate the enemy would rush out from, he divided the 2 divisions of Cold Vanguard into 4 groups. There were at least 2 Cold Vanguard regiments in front of each city gate. Behind them were cavalry soldiers with sabers in their hands. As long as the Cold Vanguard soldiers used their muskets to scare the enemy, the cavalry soldiers would rush out to capture the captives. With the Cold Vanguard soldiers as the vanguard, Yang Chendong was not worried that the enemy would rush out. He had already asked around. Among the 60,000 Sudanese soldiers, there were only 10,000 cavalry soldiers. The rest were infantrymen. Infantrymen did not have the ability to move quickly.
As for the 10,000 cavalry soldiers, if they really rushed out, the 2,000 black cavalry soldiers beside him would teach them a lesson.
At this point, Beta Persei had already prepared with Qiu Vi, Dao Shao, Ba Daojiang and the others. Yang Chendong was sure to take down the 60,000 Sudanese soldiers. The only difference was how many captives they could capture in the end.
Sinjar, who was completely unaware of this, was already preparing to rush out of the south gate with 10,000 cavalry soldiers.
The reason why he chose the south gate was intentional. If he had to choose to return to the capital, the east gate was undoubtedly the closest.
However, he did not choose it because he wanted to catch the 5-star army off guard. As long as he rushed out of the city, he would only need to adjust his direction slightly to turn east and rush back to the capital. With 10,000 cavalry soldiers, he rushed out while the fire was still burning in the city. When the southern city gate suddenly opened, the eyes of 2nd Division Lang Feng, who was guarding here, lit up. The reason he was guarding the south gate was because he was taking a gamble. Even the 6th young master did not know about the enemy's plan to break out. Who else could? Picking a random gate to guard was mostly a matter of luck. Xiao Feng's eyes lit up when he saw more and more cavalrymen running out of the gates. He knew that there were only 10,000 cavalrymen in the city.
Now that he had caught such a big fish, how could he not be happy? Everyone, get ready for battle. Machine Gun Company, prepare enough bullets. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. Immediately send someone to report to the 6th young master that the enemy cavalry has appeared at the south gate. Quick! Xiao Feng continuously gave out orders. He also walked to the front of a heavy machine gun and placed his finger on the trigger. He was ready to enjoy himself. Among the cavalry soldiers, Sinclair was completely unaware of all this.
Even though he saw the 5-star army when he opened the gate, he did not hesitate to give the order to attack. Since there were 5-star army outside the 4 cities, he just had to choose the enemy in front of him to attack.
Charge! 10,000 cavalrymen poured out of the city gate, forming a huge aura. It was said that more than 10,000 soldiers were boundless. When these 10,000 cavalrymen formed a line and overlapped each other, the impression they gave off could be described as majestic. If it was a timid person, not to mention counterattacking, it would already be considered good if they could stand there without trembling. However, when the same formation was placed in front of the experienced soldiers of the Cold Vanguard, it was like a child's play. They did not forget that the 6th young master led 2,000 black cavalry soldiers and defeated 100,000 Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry soldiers. That was what the Cold Vanguard soldiers should have done. After that incident, many people were envious of them. If the 6th young master could defeat 100,000 cavalry soldiers with 2,000 soldiers, wouldn't it be too easy for them to defeat 10,000 soldiers with 4,000 soldiers? Therefore, none of the soldiers showed any fear when facing the enemy cavalry. On the contrary, they were all filled with battle intent. They only felt that the enemy had sent too few cavalry soldiers. As the commander, Xiao Feng was also very excited.
When he saw that the enemy cavalry had all left the city and started charging, he shouted to the messenger beside him, "Order the artillery battalion to fire.
Scatter the cannons and fire 2 shots at the front. Disrupt the cavalry formation." The reason why cavalry had a crushing advantage against infantry soldiers was because of their collective charging formation. With the advantage of speed and endless charging force, there were very few infantry soldiers who could resist them. The purpose of the cannons was to disrupt the enemy's formation and suppress the advantage of cavalry soldiers to the lowest point. When that happened, they could do whatever they wanted. After receiving the order, the messenger quickly turned around and ran.
The artillery battalion had already taken out the cannons from the wooden boxes and were waiting for the order to fire.
On the other hand, the 10,000 cavalrymen led by Sinclair were still clueless. They continued to charge forward using the most primitive method. Chapter 1542. Especially after they were 2 li away from the city gate, they were already very close to the 5-star army. However, when they still couldn't see the enemy cavalry charging out, Sinjar couldn't help but reveal a joyful expression. The distance was too close. Even if the 5-star army cavalry charged, they wouldn't have the advantage of speed. At that time, he would have the complete upper hand.
Just as he was sighing in his heart that the 5-star army was only so, a flash of fire suddenly appeared in Sinjar's eyes.
Just as he instinctively felt that something was wrong, a cannonball landed a few dozen meters away from him. The cavalry at that location immediately let out a burst of cries and howls. Let's not talk about the place where the cannonballs landed and the cavalrymen were blown away. When the nearby cavalrymen heard the loud rumbling sound, they all went crazy. Under the fear, they didn't listen to their master's orders. Instead, they ran around and threw the cavalrymen on their backs off their horses. The cannonball was so loud that it caused the horses to run around like headless flies. There was no need for the 5-star army to do anything. The Sudanese cavalry that was originally in formation was already in chaos. The chaos in the formation greatly exceeded Sinjar's expectations. He originally wanted to charge out, but he couldn't help but slow down. After he realized that something was wrong, he didn't have a better idea. They had already charged out. Could it be that they had to retreat back into the city? The city was currently on fire. If they stayed there, the city would be breached sooner or later. Rather than that, they might as well give it a try. Everyone, don't be afraid. Continue to charge. As long as we charge out, we will live. He shouted loudly to boost the morale of the army. This shout finally stopped the chaos in the cavalry. Of course, the most important thing was that the cannonballs had already been fired. After the cannonballs stopped, the cavalry seemed to have regained their spirit. When they saw that the 5-star army was less than 2 li away from them, in order to survive, they mustered up their courage and ran forward with all their might. Don't be in a hurry. Fire after 300 meters. Seeing that the enemy cavalry was no longer as imposing as before, Commander Xiao Feng felt even more confident. He chuckled and spoke unhurriedly. The effective range of the 95 style was around 400 to 500 paces. If the wind was blowing, it was possible to hit further away. At 300 paces away, anyone who was hit by a bullet would be severely injured, if not killed instantly. The 2 regiments of Cold Vanguard were not in a hurry, but the Sudanese cavalry were excited. They thought that the 5-star army was at their wits' end, and they charged forward bravely with the desire to live. Quick! There are less than 500 steps left. Victory is right in front of us. Ha ha ha. Protected by his bodyguards, Single, who was riding on his horse, returned to his usual self of strategizing. His experience on the battlefield told him that at such a close distance, even the 5-star army's cavalry would be restrained by him. He could almost see victory waving at him. 450 steps. 400 steps. 350 steps. 300 steps. Fire! When they were 300 paces away, Commander Xiao Feng's voice thundered. The Cold Vanguard soldiers who had been waiting impatiently for a long time were waiting for this order. The light and heavy machine guns, coupled with the 95-style rapid fire, rained down on the Sudanese cavalry, causing them to fall to the ground one after another. Under the dense barrage of bullets, no one could break through this layer of obstruction and take a step forward. When the bullets hit a person or a horse, the Sudanese cavalry fully understood the principle of courting death by charging forward bravely. Unfortunately, it was courting death. Whoever charged faster would die faster. Under the indiscriminate barrage of bullets, no cavalry could charge within 250 paces, let alone injure the enemy. Seeing batch after batch, at least half of the cavalry died in the charge. The remaining Sudanese cavalry finally had a drastic change in expression. Without waiting for orders, they turned around and fled. In the face of this blockade of death, no one would be able to remain calm. Single's luck was not bad, perhaps because he did not charge at the front, but he survived. However, there were times when being alive was far more unbearable than being dead. Just like the current him, seeing the cavalry under his command fall down wave after wave as if they were cut chives, and then no one was able to stand up again. He was truly scared silly. He had seen the power of firearms before, but they were usually limited to short range, and reloading was very troublesome. Facing the charge of the cavalry, they could only launch one wave of attacks. Needless to say, the accuracy of the attacks was even worse. For the elite cavalry, the lethality of the attacks was very limited. Although they couldn't be ignored, the attacks wouldn't affect the cavalry's charge. They would only cause a certain amount of damage to the formation of the infantry. Unlike the firearms in the hands of the 5-star army, they were really good at reaping lives. The bullets seemed to be endless. The faster the cavalry charged, the more they died. This was an undefeatable enemy. Single finally understood why the Khanate alliance, which had a total of 1 million men, was defeated by the 5-star army, which only had a few 100,000 men. The more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. This nightmare was finally his turn. How could he defeat such an opponent? It seemed like the only choice was to escape. Single was terrified.
He led his cavalry of less than 5,000 and turned to flee.
They wanted to get out of the firing range of the muskets. As for where to go next, they would not wait for death here. It's finally our turn, right? Charge! The commander of the Mabe division, Xian Honghai, had been waiting for a long time. Seeing the enemy cavalry start to flee, about to escape the firing range of the guns, he laughed and led the cavalry of the Mabe division to charge. Along with them were 10,000 cavalry from Meng 3 division. Although their division commander Chiwen was not in the direction of the south gate, the leading general still shouted and charged after Mo Bay division. This scene was seen by Beta Persei from afar. At this time, there were 1,000 fully armed black cavalry behind him. Fuck, who ordered them to charge? Hurry, hurry, or we won't even get to drink soup. Beta Persei was anxious.
He rushed over as soon as he heard the enemy cavalry rushing out from the south gate, but it seemed like he was still one step too late.
Charge! There were firearms waiting to reap his life. Run! There were countless 5-star army chasing after him, also waiting to reap his life. Seeing that he would die no matter what, Single, who didn't want to die, rolled his eyes and made a very unmanly decision. That was to dismount and surrender. No one was willing to surrender, but after seeing the air force and powerful firearms of the 5-star army, The pride in Single's heart had long been destroyed. After knowing that he would die if he continued to fight, he wisely chose to surrender. Although it would not look good on his face, it was better to live than to die. Only by living could people have the right to talk about everything. Even their commander, Sinclair, had taken the initiative to surrender. How could the soldiers under him still care about their reputation? They immediately got off their horses and knelt down to surrender, causing the 5-star army cavalry to feel as though they were punching cotton. All of this happened to be seen by young heir who was chasing after them. He immediately laughed out loud and thought to himself, "Who told you to not wait for me, your second brother? Great. Now you won't have the chance to kill people anymore, right?" The enemies at the south gate had all surrendered except for those who died in battle. They were not the first to choose to surrender, nor were they the first to end the battle. The progress at the east gate was faster than them. They were all infantrymen, and they were first attacked by artillery. Many of them were already scared out of their wits. Then when they finally reached 300 steps in front of the 5-star army, the scene of firearms firing swallowed their last bit of courage. At that time when the 5-star army cavalry charged, there was no other choice but to surrender. This battle lasted from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. From the beginning to the end, it was only 6 hours. More than 20,000 of the 60,000 Sudanese soldiers were killed, and more than 30,000 of them surrendered. The battle ended so quickly that the Sudanese people in the city lost all hope. For a time, many people rushed out of the city gate. They were holding bags of various sizes, which were the most valuable things in their homes. They knelt on the ground and begged the 5-star army not to kill them. They surrendered. "Young master, do you want to send someone into the city to take a look?" Beta Persei saw that the people in the city had come out to surrender. He thought that Lahore city was already in his hands, so he said with a smile, "There's no need. The temperature in the city isn't too low right now. Moreover, the fire hasn't been completely extinguished yet. Let's wait a little longer. We don't lack the time to wait." Yang Chendong shook his head. Xianxia was able to achieve what he had today under his leadership. Naturally, Song played a very important role, but at the same time, his cautiousness was also very important. Otherwise, in the face of so many ambitious and ruthless people, he would have been eaten alive long ago, leaving not even his bones behind. Yes. Facing Yang Chendong's cautiousness, Beta Persei's face also became a lot more serious. He also began to reflect on whether he was a little too complacent after winning the battle. It seems that he has to change in the future and become more calm. It's just that Beta Persei has nothing to do with the word calm. It was not easy to teach this kind of person, who would shout and scream whenever there was a battle, to be cautious. Chapter 1543. The city of Lahore changed hands just like that. Because the 5-star army had set up an encirclement in advance and did not let any enemy escape, the news did not spread. It was likely that many people were still hoping for a counterattack. The Indian army was the most typical example. The world's first cavalry army and the first cavalry army were like two meteors that streaked across the sky. They entered the Indian territory at lightning speed and took over the important border city of Tultan. Next, they split up and attacked from two directions. In a short period of time, they caught the Indian army off guard and took over a dozen cities. When the news reached the capital of India, King Jawaharlal Nehru was really shocked. He originally thought that the appearance of the 5-star army would lead to a battle with the Delhi Sultanate. By then, no matter who won or lost, he would be able to act according to the situation. He would have ample time to prepare and reap the benefits. Who would have thought that the enemy would appear so soon? Also, from the information he received, the 5-star army did not take over Lahore. How did they have the courage to enter the Indian territory? Was they not afraid that the Sultanate would cut off their path of retreat? At this time, Nehru still could not see his own weakness, which was being conservative. He rarely fought outside. Occasionally, he would send troops to fight against small countries like the Sultanate. This made him feel very good, and he thought that the Indian army was invincible. This mentality of not being able to go out and take a look was similar to the mentality of the Qing army in the late Qing dynasty. When such an army encountered a truly powerful force, the opponent would teach them how to behave in a matter of minutes. There were too many things that he could not understand, but time did not allow Nehru to think too much. He also received news that the battleships of the Five-Star Army had begun to move towards some coastal towns in the country. Unfortunately, the city he was in was close to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. This kind of attack from both land and sea really gave him a headache. If it was only a unilateral attack by the army or navy, he would not be afraid. India had a population of nearly 10 million. In addition to the 500,000 standing army, it could recruit no less than 1 million troops at any time.
With this, he was confident that he could use the human wave tactic to drive out any opponent that entered the country.
However, when the land and sea came together, he felt very passive. It seemed that he couldn't attack either one first. Moving the capital. After thinking about it, it seemed that this was the only decision that could solve his crisis in the shortest time possible.
As long as he was far away from the coastal cities, the threat of the Five-Star Army's navy would be reduced to the lowest. At that time, he would have more than enough time to fight against the Five-Star Army. Moving the capital was a huge matter and involved too many things. It wasn't something that could be done just because one wanted to. When Zhu Di wanted to move the capital of the great Ming dynasty from Nanjing to Beijing, he had prepared for several years. However, what Nehru lacked the most now was time. If he continued to wait, how many more cities would the 100,000 cavalrymen of the Five-Star Army attack? Also, once the Five-Star Army's navy appeared outside Mumbai, he could only passively take a beating. In order to not worsen the situation, Nehru first chose the location of the new capital, which was Bidar city in the central region of the country. Not far from the city was the Godavari River, which could be used as a barrier to block the charge of the Five-Star Army's cavalrymen. Moreover, there were many mountains and roads that were not convenient. If it was during normal times, it would be somewhat unsuitable as the capital. After all, it was not conducive to economic development. However, during wartime it was the best place to defend. It was similar to Chongqing in the country. After making the decision, Nehru summoned the civil and military officials and announced the decision in person. After that, he did not dare to say that there were objections and announced the dismissal of the court. He also needed time to arrange everything. For example, the number of concubines and children in the palace was quite a lot. The sudden move of the capital shocked many people. For example, most of the officials had bought a lot of properties in the capital. Those were things that could not be taken away. Now that the capital was suddenly moved, what were they going to do with those things? Those were immovable property that could not be taken away. Usually, when Nehru, as the king, made a decision, his subordinates usually did not dare to oppose it. After all, it would affect the dignity of the king of the country. However, when an order involved the interests of the majority, it was difficult to carry out the order even if it was given by the king. Just like in India at this time, the officials actually collectively opposed the move of the capital. So much so that the palace began to make preparations. However, the officials were stubborn and refused to budge. Time was wasted like this. Due to the failure of the government order, not only did it buy more time for the Five-Star Army to arrive, it also caused the situation in India to become a mess. Nehru was indeed an ambitious and ruthless figure. Seeing that his officials did not listen to his orders, he angrily led the people in the palace and went straight to Vidal city, leaving more than 80% of the officials in Mumbai. Originally, he wanted to kill one or two of them to intimidate the others. However, he was afraid that if he really did that, it would cause internal strife and cause everyone to oppose him. So, he had no choice but to do it. The king actually left, bringing only the members of the royal family and less than 20% of the obedient officials with him. When the news spread out, the officials became a little anxious. They were blaming themselves for pushing the king too hard. Should they lower their heads and follow the king when he left? State Preceptor Qiao Han stood up and publicly said that moving the capital was an important matter for the country. How could it be done just like that? The king's action was mostly to throw a tantrum. As long as the officials did not leave with him, it would not be long before the king would definitely return. When the time came, everyone would collectively go forward and admit their mistakes and the matter would be over. The state preceptor's words struck a chord in the hearts of some people. For a time, they followed him. As the state preceptor, Qiao Han enjoyed a very high status in India. Now that he stood up and said these things, many people thought that they had found the root of the problem. As a result, even if the king left the capital, the officials still had no intention of following him.
How would they know that some of Chao Han's actions had already incurred Neru's dissatisfaction? Chao Han was the one who had previously prevented him from helping the Khaganate send troops.
Because of this, Nehru had long thought of replacing him.
If it were not for the change in the situation, George would have been arrested and punished by now. Nehru knew this, but the officials did not. So, after the king was gone, everyone instinctively followed the state preceptor's lead. However, others did not know, but as the state preceptor himself, Chao Han knew. Feeling that his position was in danger, in order to save himself, he took the initiative to look for Xianxia this time. After a discussion, these words came out. Xianxia, the former director of the Foreign Affairs Group of the Security Bureau, was transferred to the Central Asia region more than a year ago to serve as the branch director. His most glorious achievement was to instigate the rebellion of the famous General Chen Di of Jianghu, Yunnan province, as well as Long Qi, He Guang, and others of the Lansong kingdom. Considering that he was good at this time, he was entrusted with the position of the branch director of the Central Asia Region Security Bureau by Director Yang San. As soon as he came here, Xianxia investigated a lot of information and selected some people who could be targeted. This state preceptor Chao Han was among them. Under his efforts, the greedy Chao Han really became good friends with Xianxia. In front of a large amount of gold and silver, although he had vaguely guessed Xianxia's identity, Chao Han did not mention it. He even helped him to do a big thing, which was to prevent King Nehru from sending troops to help the Khaganate alliance. It seemed that he was living off the Khaganate alliance, but in fact, things like collusion with foreign countries were too common in history. Especially during the Warring States period, it was the most common thing. Often, when one side could not defeat the other, they would find a way to deal with the other side. Then, there would be cases of troops retreating when they almost reached the capital of a country. In the end, Chao Han was the state preceptor, not the king. This difference of one word was the difference between a monarch and a minister. The monarch was permanent, but the minister could be changed. At that time, most people became officials only for money. Otherwise, there would not be a saying that thousands of miles became an official only for money. When Xianxia took out something that satisfied Chao Han, he naturally had to speak up for him. In a way, the two of them could be considered friends. Nehru intended to take down Chao Han, the state preceptor. This was a friend in trouble, so Xianxia should stand up and think of a way for him, which led to the current situation. Nehru did not know about this. He did not leave the capital in a moment of impulse. He wanted to force everyone to follow him. He was using practical actions to make everyone choose. This plan was feasible. Originally, there were already some ministers who wanted to follow, but because of Chao Han's interference, everything turned into nothing. After knowing the reactions of the ministers in the city, Nehru was furious. He wanted to immediately cut Chao Han into pieces. Men secretly informed the people in the capital to kill Chao Han. Nehru knew that if Chao Han did not die, it would be difficult for the ministers to move the capital, so he gritted his teeth and said fiercely. Nehru wanted to kill Chao Han, but it was too late. Whether it was Chao Han's wisdom or Xianxia's experience, how could they not have guessed this? They were already prepared. Not only did they change Chao Han's residence, but they also increased the security around him by several times. In the next few days, there were no less than 4 or 5 attempts on Chao Han's life. But under the tight security, even the assassins did not see the shadow of the target. Under the continuous assassination, Chao Han was determined to follow the 5-star army to the end. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.